And you're going to go crazy trying to figure out why FlutterFlow is not properly displaying the response. This is an issue that when I first discovered it, I couldn't solve this issue for a couple of days. Many of you have definitely experienced this at one time or another. Already have an error because I'm trying to do something and I can't do it. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you super helpful FlutterFlow tips that I wish I had known earlier. And I'm sure that by the end of the video, you're going to be putting at least one of these tips to use, if not all of them. So definitely stay tuned until the end for some final thoughts. Now remember, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I talk about on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community using the link in the description below the video. Now, let's say you're building an app that's going to be displaying some posts. So maybe something like a social media app, maybe a Twitter clone, a Facebook clone, something along those lines. So your app is going to have a page that's simply going to list a list of posts. So maybe these are going to be, posts from people that you're following, or just posts from random people as recommendations, or something to that extent. And here you want to display a banner or a sponsored post after every X post. So for instance, after every 4 posts, you want to display a banner, maybe a text ad, or maybe like a sponsored post, something that you see on Twitter or on Facebook today. And this question actually came from one of our valued members in our private community. And so how would you accomplish something like this? Well, it's actually very, very simple. So if you take a look at this page here, you can see that we have the same list of posts, but this time I'm displaying a custom widget, a banner in this case, after every 4 posts. So we have 4 posts, I'm showing a banner, 4 posts, I'm showing a banner, etc., etc. So let me show you how it's done. So if we go back here, I have here a regular page that I showed you in the first example. This is a simple list view, and all I'm doing is showing you a bunch of elements from app state. Okay, so nothing new if you've been using FlutterFlow for some time. But if we go to the solution here, what we're doing is we have that list view, but now we're using a stack, and we are displaying different rows depending on a certain condition. So here we have something called an add row, and here we have something called a regular row, okay? And for the add row to be displayed, we have here a condition. So if you click here, you can see that the condition we have is that if it's not the first element, and if it's an element that's divisible by 4, show an add and show the element as well, okay? And for this regular row, the condition that we have here is that show the regular row if it's the first element, or if it's not divisible by 4, because when it's divisible by 4, we want to show the add row. And the way that we track which element to show is by using something called index in list. And that is because if you're doing list views of any kind, or grid views, or anything else, there is a special variable available to you called index in list. So as you can see, I'm using a list view here, and then all my elements that are children of this list view, they have access to the special variable called index in list. And so let's say I pick a random element here, let's say this add banner, and I want to change it. I can simply go to post item, and I have this index in list. And this index in list is available for all the widgets that are below the list view that we are working with. And this index in list tells you where a specific element is in the list, and based on its position, you can make a certain decision. In this case, we are saying that we want to display ads after every 4th element. and we are using index and list to achieve just that. Now, this next tip that I want to show you took me some time to solve, because at first glance, it seems like this is a problem that cannot be solved with FlutterFlow. Now, if you take a look at this page here, we have here a simple grid view consisting of 7 elements. And what I wanted to do here was I wanted to have an ability to toggle each of these elements on and off independently of other elements. So let's say I click on something and I want that elements to just be selected. And what happens by default in FlutterFlow is that if you click, it selects all the elements, okay? Because in FlutterFlow, the way you build the list is use a single widget to do everything, right? So now if I click again, it toggles it all. And so how would you create it so that when you click on a specific element, it only toggles that specific element on and off? And this question was also asked by one of our valued members in our private community. If we go back to the initial list view here, this is the initial list view. We have here a grid view that pulls the elements from an app state. So in this case, I'm simply displaying this index and list, but I can display pretty much anything. And on this container level, I created an action. And the purpose of this action is to set a Boolean or whether something is clicked or not. And this way we can display a red container if it's clicked, or a container with its default color if it's not clicked. And so the way this works is that I have here an action that sets a page state variable to true. And then if you click on it again, it sets it to false. And this way it keeps toggling. And the next thing that I did was I went ahead and I set the color for this container to a condition. So this fill color now has a condition that if the click is true, which means that toggle is on, I want the background color for this container to be red. Now, if it's false, I wanted to unset the color, and that is why you are seeing this behavior. But the problem here is that it's setting this color for all of them. And if you take a look at this view here, you can see that we only have one container to work with, right? So I cannot modify, let's say, the first container or the second container or the last container. I only have one container to work with. So how do you solve this riddle? Well, it's actually very, very easy to do. So if we check out the solution here, the way that we do it is similarly to our previous problem. And what we need to do is create a stack with a bunch of conditions. So here I created a stack, and here we have a container default and a container click. And here I have a condition. Container ID is not the index in this list, right? So what is a container ID? Well, if we go in here, container ID is the page state. And so if we come over here, you can see that I have a page state called container ID. And this way, we can track which specific container we clicked on, right? Because if we come over here, we have a click action that when we open up, we're updating page state with this index and list. And this way we know exactly which container we clicked on. So if we clicked on the first container, container ID is going to be 0. If we clicked on the third container, container ID is going to be 2. And once we know which container was clicked on, we can take specific action to paint that specific container in a specific color. And so now that we know which specific container was clicked on, we can display the specific widget. So as you can see, if this container was clicked on, then this widget is going to be active. If it's a container that was not clicked on, this widget is going to be active. And so at any point in time, if I click on a specific container, one container is going to be active, whereas the rest of the containers are not going to be active. And for that specific container that's going to be active, it's very, very trivial to set a specific fill color, right? So as you can see, this container that's going to be active, we set a specific fill color, whereas this container default, we do not have any color, right? This color is the default color. And so This way, the system is tracking which specific container that we clicked on. And once the app knows which specific container was clicked on, we can draw these containers according to how we want. And as a result, we now have a page that works like this. So depending on which container you click on, only that specific container is going to be painted a different color. And I don't really think you need me to tell you how useful this specific pattern is when it comes to building all kinds of different apps. So you can build an app that has different flashcards, an app that displays a different result, that does something different depending on which specific widget the user is interacting with. And so a very, very useful pattern, and thanks very much to the person who brought this to my attention. Now, this next tip is a result of a question that I received in our Patreon community, and the person wanted to know how to do dynamic navigation in their app. So let's say you're building an app and you have some feature where a user does something and they need to be redirected to a specific page, and you do not know beforehand, when you're building the app, which page that would be. So let me show you what I mean. So here I have a view that when you click on this button, the user is going to be redirected to a specific page. So if I click here, the user is redirected to this custom page 1. But I was only able to build out this functionality because I knew beforehand which page the user is going to be redirected to. Now, let's say on the other hand, I do not know which page the user is going to be redirected to. How would I do that? Well, you cannot do it in FlutterFlow as of now. That is not something that's supported out of the box, and so you have to do something differently. And so the way that you solve this problem is with something that's called a custom action. So let me show you how that is done. So right here I have another page where I am listing various pages. And so if you click here, you can see that this is actually a drop down that displays various pages and their URLs. Now, when the user selects the page that they want to be navigated to, and they click on this button, we're going to execute an action that includes a custom action. So if we select this button, look at our actions. I have here a custom action that does a redirection based on a parameter that's being passed to it. So we are passing a URL, and this custom action does a navigation using this launch URL that is actually built into FlutterFlow. FlutterFlow uses it itself in its navigation actions. And so now if we run this app, we have this page. The user can select any page that they want, and we are going to navigate them to it. So let's say I select custom page 2, click navigate, and we have redirected them to custom page 2. Let's say they select custom page 3, click navigate, and we are redirecting them to custom page 3. And similarly, let's say we select custom page 1, click navigate, and we have redirected them to custom page 1. And so as a result, when you are using custom actions, you can create dynamic navigation inside of the app as well as externally if you want that as well. And that is something that you cannot do with built-in functionality in FlutterFlow, because in order to navigate the user, you are forced to pick a page here instead of passing a parameter and then dynamically navigating the user while the app is running. Now, with this next tip, I'm going to be talking about a problem that many of you have definitely experienced in the past or will experience in the future. And as you can see, I already have an error because I'm trying to do something and I can't do it. Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to display this page here with the data that I'm receiving via an API call, and I'm executing this API call get records. And this is a very, very simple API. So this is get records, this is the API call, and if we run it, this is the result that we get. And so essentially this is a list of objects, and each object has an ID and has a type. And as a result, what I want to do is I want to display the ID here, and I want to display the type here. So as you can see, I have the ID set right here, and that's fine. And I have the type set right here. And that is absolutely fine. So why am I getting this red screen of death? Why am I seeing this error? Well, the reason I'm seeing this error is that while the ID is fine, the type is incorrect because this checkbox here needs a Boolean. And so when it loads this data, it sees that this is a string. You see, this true is technically a Boolean, but because it's surrounded by quotes, FlutterFlow thinks this is a string. And so how do we make this work? How do we solve this problem? Well, the way to solve this problem is to cast this specific value to another value. And so because FlutterFlow believes that this value here is a string, we need to cast it from a string to a Boolean. And the way that you cast one value to another value is with code expressions. And so here's a second view. And in this second view, I'm still displaying this ID here. But for the checkbox, I now have a code expression. So if you select this here, I am passing this type here, and then I'm taking this type and I'm converting it to a Boolean. First, I'm specifying a Boolean here, and secondly, I have here a very, very quick expression that sets the resulting value to either true or false. More specifically, I'm saying if the value that I'm passing is equal to true, meaning that string is equal to true, give me a true Boolean. Otherwise, give me a false Boolean. And as a result, this is what happens. This is the response we are seeing. We're seeing the IDs and we're seeing the checkbox. And because all of these values are true, we are seeing all of these checkboxes checked. And like I said, I guarantee you, if you've been doing FlutterFlow development for any amount of time, you have probably experienced this problem. And I also guarantee you that even if you have not experienced this problem, you're going to be experiencing this problem in the future because it's so common to work with data that does not fit with the data that FlutterFlow expects. My next tip is also a problem that many of you have definitely experienced this at one time or another. And in fact, this is an issue that when I first discovered it, I couldn't solve this issue for a couple of days. I think I lost an entire weekend debugging my app and making it work. And so you're definitely going to be thanking me as soon as you see what the issue is and the solution to this specific issue. So if you take a look at this example here, we are seeing null, and we do not expect to see null. We actually need to see a value. And so why are we seeing null instead of a value? And so if we go back to FlutterFlow, we have here a very, very simple page. We have just a column and a text widget. Now this text widget is trying to load data from an API call. So if we take a look at this backend query, we are executing this hello world API call. So once we have executed, we are taking its value, in this case, its entire body, and displaying it here. Unfortunately, this is displaying null when in fact our API call does return a value. So if we go to our API calls here, we have this hello world, and I'm using this API call here. Now, if I do response and test, I'm going to be getting a strange value. I'm actually getting null, but that's not the right value. Because if I take this URL and I execute it in my browser, I'm getting hello world. So why is it not showing hello world? This button right here, this button here, this thing here, and this thing here needs to show hello world, right? Because this is what my API endpoint is coming back to me with, right? Hello world. So why is it if I go to my API call response and test and I do this test tape, I'm getting a null? Well, the reason I'm seeing a null is because FlutterFlow expects a JSON back. And because it's not seeing a JSON, it's simply seeing a string. It's coming back with a null. And so when you are working with FlutterFlow, make sure that any of the API calls that you're working with always return a JSON. And that is not the case all the time, because an API can return anything. It can come back with a string, it can come back with a number, it can come back with anything. And so technically FlutterFlow should never assume that the response from any API call is going to be a JSON object. It could be just about anything, but FlutterFlow does assume that it's going to be a JSON object. And if you do not give it a JSON object as a response from some API endpoint, you're going to be seeing null here. And just to show you how easily this problem can be solved, I have here another API call that when you execute it, it comes back with a JSON object. So we have a message now, and that message is hello world. And so if I take this new API call, I go back to my FlutterFlow app, I change the call definition, and I go to response and test, and now I do my test API call, I get back this JSON right here. And now if I go back to my UI here, I will be able to display the exact message that I'm getting back from my API endpoint. And so if I change the API to the second API, as you can see, the first page actually displays the entire JSON body. And I can also display a specific element here. In this case, this is hello world. So always make sure that the API endpoints that you're dealing with come back with a properly formatted JSON object. Otherwise, FlutterFlow won't know what to do with it, and it's simply going to display null, and you're going to go crazy trying to figure out why FlutterFlow is not properly displaying the response, where if you simply type in that URL in the browser, you're going to be seeing the response, whatever it may be. Now, if you have experienced one of these issues, then you're probably glad that there is a solution that you can start putting to good use in one of your apps that you're working on right now, or maybe an app that you're thinking about building in the future, where you just didn't know how to implement something. Maybe it was the first thing that I talked about, or the second thing. Well, now you know exactly how to implement it. Plus, you're much more prepared for some of the issues, some of the challenges that might come your way as you start building your app. And so the next natural step that awaits you is being able to view and or clone this app, as well as viewing and or cloning pretty much all the other apps that I built on this channel. And you can do just that when you join our amazing Patreon community. And remember, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you'll be able to get access to this app right here. You can view and or clone it. You can copy the entire page and paste it in one of the apps that you're working with right now. Or you can simply take a look and see firsthand how exactly I solved these issues and try to do the same in order to gain valuable experience and practice when it comes to building very useful, powerful, and helpful no-code apps. Plus, like I said, you're not going to get access to just this app. You're going to get access to over 150 apps that I built on this channel. They're all on my Patreon page. You can view and or clone them right now. Plus, you'll be able to connect to other amazing members in our community who are using FlutterFlow to build awesome apps. And that's not even it. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to even more content. You're going to get access to Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and our Patreon supported masterclass series where I do deep dives on specific topics that the community votes on. And in fact, just earlier today, I published a brand new Q&A session on our Patreon community where I answer questions from our members, and that content is only available to our supporters. And so regardless whether you're struggling with a problem right now or you're planning to build a big app in the future, you're definitely going to get a ton of value by joining our amazing Patreon community. And so if all of that sounds awesome, then I urge you to check it out and consider becoming a member. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.